Well, that's a very familiar parable. I suppose I would say that and the parable of the Good Samaritan are probably the very best known of all of Jesus' parables. I think they're the ones that I remember the most and the most quickly, probably because I grew up in Sunday school and vacation Bible school and those things, and I just remember hearing them a lot, hearing sermons on them, doing sermons on them, and even though it's a rather lengthy one, it is one of the more famous of the parables and certainly one of the more beautiful. But like anything else, it has to be unpacked a little bit before we can really get to the heart of what's going on. It's a story told in Jesus' own time using some of the images that people around Jesus who heard the story would have been able to understand. It's a time different from our own time, but in some ways almost exactly the same. A parable is a story, and it's intended to teach a lesson. It's sort of like an allegory, and the images and characters stand for something else, but the pieces don't fit together exactly, so it's sort of left open-ended, and that really is the definition of a parable. It's sort of an open-ended story, and Jesus was a master at telling stories like that to illustrate points. So here we have a family that's probably dysfunctional. And therefore, it's probably like most families that we are a part of, because most of us are part of some kind of dysfunctional family. It might not be in our immediate one, but we all have cousins probably, and maybe in-laws or outlaws out there somewhere that we would rather not other people hear about. I mean, it's just true, let's face it. We all have families that have skeletons in their closet. This one's no different. And what you have is a couple of boys who have been raised with everything they could possibly want. They never had to struggle. They never had to worry about what was coming down the pike. They were wealthy. And it almost seems like maybe they were part of a royal family of types with the robe and the ring. These two boys were raised, and one of them older, one of them younger, but they lived in a time when things happened a little bit differently than they happen now. When the father was to leave his estate to his sons, a kind of primogeniture took place, and the oldest son got the biggest and the best. And the younger son got something like leftovers, which in this case seems to have been a lot. I remember many years ago, someone doing research on my family found a will of one of our ancestors. It would be my great-great-great-great-grandfather back in the 1700s, and he left a will in North Carolina. And it seems that maybe he was pretty well off because he had thousands of acres. And that I suppose something like a plantation. But when you read the will, of all the 10 or 12 kids that he had, the very first one got almost everything. I, of course, descended from one other than the first one, sadly. But that's the way life is. So the other children would get something, but they wouldn't get everything. The oldest would get most of it. The oldest son here would get the house, the farm, whatever else there was. He would be able to continue the family business as it had been continuing probably for generations. And the youngest son would get a monetary type gift. It might be substantial, but certainly wouldn't be what the oldest son got. And the thing about inheritance, you see, is you don't inherit until somebody dies. They can give it to you, but you don't inherit until somebody is dead. So I want you to catch what's happening in this story. Here's the younger son, probably spoiled, overindulged, never had to struggle for anything. I'm sure he had to work, but whatever it was he was required to do, he didn't like it. He felt like he was imprisoned. He didn't like where he was. He was a dreamer, a schemer, who wanted bigger, better things than what he had before. It's an urge that's in all of us. I love the way C.S. Lewis put it. He said, within all of us there is lurking beneath the surface a longing for our own far-off country, where all our dreams can be fulfilled and all our disappointments can be left behind. That's what the young son wanted. He'd been stifled and didn't get to live like he wanted to. He had to follow some rules probably he didn't want to have to follow. He didn't like probably living in the shadow of his older brother. He didn't like not being the center of attention, didn't like not being the boss and in charge of things, and thought to himself, well, I can do better on my own. All I lack is some money. So if Dad will go ahead and give me my share of the estate, I'll be off and I'll make my way. I'll fulfill my dreams. I'll make my fortune. I'll get my goals and I'll get those goals accomplished, and I'll be happy. That's what I need, because I'm not real happy right now. I don't get to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and therefore I'm not happy. I don't like living under somebody else's thumb. I don't like somebody else telling me what to do. I don't like having to do what Dad and older brother tell me to do because they're in charge and I'm not. So I'll go off and make my own way. I'll go off into my far country and I'll make my fortune. I'll show them. They'll see. I might even come back one day and show them all that I've accomplished, and I'm sure that they'll be proud of me. If nothing else, they'll be jealous of me, and I like that too. And so he goes to his father and says, Father, give me what's mine. Now the significance of what's happening here doesn't come across from the text itself, but I want you to understand what's happening. The younger son literally goes to the father and says, Father, from this day on, you are dead to me. Give me my inheritance. Because that's the only way you get an inheritance, if somebody dies. Can you imagine how that hurt the father? And yet, what did the father do? He gathered the property that was to be the younger son's, and he gave it to him and said, here is your inheritance. And the younger son is beside himself with joy. And he doesn't hang around very long, does he? The very next day, he gets up and he takes his money and gathers whatever he needs and his possessions, and he takes off from his father's house off to that far-off country that he was longing for so much to make his way. And what happens? It didn't take long for him to go through every bit of it. I've had people in my family talk about other people in my family like that Aunt so-and-so inherited Uncle so-and-so's property, and within 2 or 3 months, it was all gone. I don't know how much property it was, but some of it was substantial, I'm sure. How long would it take you to spend $1 million? Not very long. I bet a lot of us, if we really tried, we could go through $1 million in a week or two, pretty easily, without much difficulty. I'd go through about half of it getting that Bentley that I want. Because I would show them, that would be cool. People would look up to me if I drove a Bentley. Not a used one, a new one. That's the way he was. He got off and he got freedom. The problem was he wasn't mature enough to handle the freedom, and so pretty soon he had squandered whatever fortune he had been given in dissolute living. Doesn't necessarily mean that he was doing bad things. He was doing wasteful things. That's why it's called the prodigal son. That word prodigal actually means wasteful. He goes off and he spends every bit of it. There's none left. And then he's in a bad fix. So now, to add insult to injury, if you catch it from the story, you have to put yourself in the mind of those people who first and heard this story, who were sitting there listening to Jesus, Jewish people, that things got so bad that the younger son had to hire himself out to a farmer as a pig feeder. That's about as insulting a thing or degrading a thing as a Jewish boy could do. But they don't eat pork. They won't have anything to do with it. They don't associate with it. And so a hog to him would have been pretty much the lowest form on the life chain, and he wanted nothing to do with it, and yet there he was. And he was even jealous of the hogs because they got more to eat than he did. And then I love the way Jesus told the story. Then the younger son came to himself. He had an epiphany, a revelation, if you will, and thought to himself, goodness, here I am feeding pigs, wallowing in the pig farm, giving them seeds, and I have nothing to eat. Giving them the corn on the cob or whatever it was they fed them back then. I doubt it was that, but they fed them something. And whatever it was, he wanted it because he was hungry. And then it dawned on him one day, you know what? I can go back home. I'll go back home and I'll say, Dad, I didn't do right. Put me in the barn and let me work for you because you always treated the slaves or the servants better than most people have treated me. At least I won't be hungry. I'll have enough to eat. You wonder whether anything had really changed at that point. Had he really fully come to himself and realized that he was where he was because of his own doing? Because of his own decisions? And how bold would someone have to be to go back to their father who previously, just a few years before, literally said to him, you, for all intents and purposes, are dead to me. You don't matter. You're dead to me. To now go back as a beggar, the audacity of it, because he wanted his belly full. But that's what he did. And you know the story, that the father saw him from a long way away coming down the road, and he went out to greet him and gave him a robe and a ring and told his servants to kill the fatted calf and let's have a party because he's home. See, even though he treated the father as if the father were dead to him, the father never forgot. He always remembered. And he always grieved and loved over the loss and now the homecoming of his son. But that's not the whole story. The older brother's out there in the field. He's working like he's been working every day since the younger brother left. He never treated the father that way. He always did what he was told. He was the obedient one. He went to the field when he had to go to the field. He did the chores that he had to do. Whatever his father gave to him to do, he fulfilled. He was not a disobedient or disrespectful son, but he too had gone away just as far from the father as the younger son. And that's illustrated in the story when he says, how can you do this, Dad? He treated you like you're just a piece of garbage. Threw you away. And I've been here all these years, and you've never thrown me a party. You never killed a calf for me and let me invite my friends over and us have a night of enjoyment like this. All I've done for you is work, 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 work. I don't see how you can do this. That's the way he treated you. And now you're treating me the same way because you're giving him a party who said you're dead to me and you've never done anything for me. And of course, Jesus in the parable says, the Father says, this son was dead, but now is alive. He was lost, but now he's found. We have to celebrate. You were always with me. Well, why did Jesus tell this parable? Who's who? How do the pieces fit together? Well, the oldest son is sort of a picture of the religious authorities of Jesus' day, the Pharisees, the scribes, and the priests, and others who thought that they had always been on God's side. The real religious people that thought that they had been faithful and loyal to God just because they hadn't done what the younger son did, but that wasn't the case. They were as far removed as was the younger son. And the younger son is represented by all those people that most of us would consider to be godless people. Back then it would have been Gentiles, pagans, people not of the fold, people not among the chosen. And the story is the story of humanity, that humanity has walked far away from God. I have. You have. We all have. And we wanted the benefit of what God has to offer, but we wanted it on our own terms. And often it's been squandered. And of course, the Father is a representation of God in a way. The Father who gave these two sons life, Father who raised them, who disciplined them, who showed them the way, who gave them more than what they needed, and who even when the younger son said, you no longer count, you no longer matter to me, you're dead to me, still loved his son. Now, I think the story is named wrong in our common way of thought. It shouldn't be called the prodigal son. It ought to be called the prodigal father, because he's the real extravagant one here. He's the one who's really wasteful. When the younger son comes home, instead of saying to him, it's too late, you shouldn't have done what you did all those years ago, I cannot let that go, I cannot forgive you. I wonder how many of us would be as forgiving as the father in the parable. It would be hard. If one of our children came to us and said, I hate you, you no longer count, you no longer matter to me, would we be able to look beyond our pride and do what this father did when he saw his son coming down the road? This is the father that's wasteful. He's given the son his inheritance, all that he's entitled to, everything that the law and decency would require him to give to the son. He owes him nothing else. His duty was severed all those years ago. And yet he sees the son coming, and he calls for a robe and a ring and treats him as if he was royal, kills the fatted calf, and they have a party, a celebration. In addition to that, the older son, who is so jealous, he hasn't been left out. He was given the most. It might not be fully his just yet, but he gets the rest of the property. He's the one that's going to be the most well off in the end. So the father demonstrates love toward both sons in an extravagant way. Now, why did Jesus tell this parable? He told it because he wants people to understand that, you know what? God is like this prodigal father. God is a prodigal father. Make no mistake. We don't deserve anything. We don't earn our keep. We don't live good enough lives. We can't live up to our own standards, let alone God's standards. And like the younger son, how many times have some of us gone off on a journey to a far-off country and squandered the gifts of the Father? Have we loved when we should love? Have we brought peace when we should bring peace? Have we spoken words of hope where hope needs to be spoken? Have we acted like we belong to the Father, or we're doing just what we want to do? The good news is, when we get to a place where we're like the younger son and we come to ourselves and say, well, I'm just going to go back. The extravagant, prodigal, wasteful father is always willing to give more than he's ever given before. And it's a gift. We don't earn it. We are absolutely not entitled to it. And yet, God celebrates. God literally celebrates when one who has been lost is found. And when any of us who have been wandering off on our own come to ourselves and come home. The Father's the prodigal. And that's good news, because otherwise we would have no hope. So if you're on a journey today that's grown wearisome or tiresome, you can come back. If you've been wasteful in your living and don't know what you should do next, you can come back. No matter where you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you're doing, when the Father sees you, He'll bring out the very best and give it to you free. That's the gospel. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.